Welcome everyone to today's session on spoken versus written language by Raji Joshi. I thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning. Before we start the session, I would like to lay out a few ground rules. First is please mute your microphone. The microphone icon is seen on the menu bar at the top next to meeting layouts, pods, audio. Please mute your microphones and raise your queries through the Q&A chat window. You can see that on the Q&A chat window is to your extreme left. You can please address your queries there. I hope you can all see the PPT slide. It is now open at the title slide which says TIBCO Spoken versus Written Language. The queries addressed to the speaker should be put in the Q&A window. Any other queries you have related to audio and video sent to me through the general chat window. I hope this is clear. And once again, I thank you all. Before start of the session, I would like to thank Adobe for providing us Adobe Connect, which is this webinar. It has enabled us all to gather here. And so on behalf of STC India, I thank the organization. I also thank speaker Raji, who has offered time off to educate us all on spoken versus written language. Raji is currently a consulting editor with TIBCO Software. She also has extensive experience as a technical writer and editor, and she has worked with a couple of other organizations. She has also been a trainer in soft skills and behavioral skills, which are also an area of passion for her. And she also likes to pun for fun and listen to jazz. Over now to Raji Joshi. You can see Raji Joshi online under the identity Manisha Khurana. She is online in this session under the identity Manisha Khurana. So questions can be addressed to her under this identity. Please type your queries to her in Q&A window, and general queries on the performance of Adobe Connect audio video in the general chat window. Thank you. Over to Raji.
Good morning everybody, and thanks for spending a Saturday morning like this. We are going to have a session on speaking versus written writing, or spoken language versus written language. The pen is mightier than the sword, goes the old adage. But the pen, let's tweak it a little bit and make it the pen is mightier than the spoken word. Or the purpose of all language is to communicate. That is, move thoughts or information from one person to another person. There are always at least two people in any communication. To communicate, one person must put something out and the other person must take something in. That's input. My thoughts go into your head. You write me, that is output again. Your thoughts go out of your head. I read your words, that is input. Thoughts go into my head. Have I confused you enough? Okay. So language has four skills. For output, that is speaking and writing. and 2 for input, that is listening and reading. Speaking and listening, writing and reading. And don't forget, readers make the best writers. To put it in a nutshell, 2 of the skills are for spoken communication and the other 2 are for written communication. Now, let's see the agenda for today. Written language, spoken language, written language in technical communication, spoken language in technical communication, differences between written and spoken language, effective written language, effective spoken language, combining written and spoken language. What about written language? Written language is the representation of a language by means of a writing system. It can be saved for posterity with the assumption that 100% of it will be read, understood, and remembered. Spoken language. Spoken language is language produced by articulate sounds as opposed to written language. Many languages have no written form and so are only spoken. As a rule of thumb, the audience will remember about 1/2 of what was said. Like for instance, after you listen to me, you may not remember 50% of it. But when you get your PPTs, then you'll remember, oh yeah, this is what she said. Written communication is at times simpler to execute than verbal communication. I'm sure a lot of people agree with this. People are prolific writers, good knowledge of the subject, good language, they work. When it comes to speaking, they are tongue-tied. Some can speak up in discussions in meetings. It's addressing an audience where they meet their Waterloo. What is language? Language is a code for communication. Languages where meaning is arbitrarily assigned to symbols. Language is learned, not biologically inherited. Language is a code that comprises letters or characters grouping to make words, and words have meanings. You need to learn a language, you cannot inherit it. It is nurture that empowers a person with language, not nature. Because when you were born, you didn't know any language. You had to learn language through your environment, which means your parents or relatives or other people as well. You had to come in contact with other human beings to learn language. I mean, there are stories of children who have grown up with wolves and stories like that where they could not speak any language. They just made sounds, just as the wolves did. Technical writers and communication. Technical writers are required to be good communicators. They need to speak up in meetings and listen to the other discussions with team members and members of other teams. Interview SMEs to obtain information, write emails, hold telephonic conversations, and so on. You need sufficient command over the language to speak up in meetings. The same goes for listening to others and understanding what they say. Technical writers need to be able to ask relevant questions to get their facts straight. So, it is obvious that their communication skills have to be good. Written language in technical communication. Written language enables readers to use a technology or understand a process or concept. Written language uses an objective, not a subjective tone. Now let's see what a subjective tone is. The writer expresses his views and opinions in addition to facts. For example, the internet is slow today at 345 megabytes per second. Now here you have an opinion as well as a fact. So it's objective. An objective tone would be when the writer only sticks to facts and lets the readers form their own opinion about something. For example, today the internet speed is 345 megabytes per second, which is, there is no opinion here. Written language or elusiveness. For example, it is very critical that the mobile application developer implements each of these interaction points. But it's always better to say the mobile application developer must implement each of these interaction points, where now there is no elegance or elusiveness in the second sentence, where there's more clarity and exactness. In the subjective tone, the person has expressed an opinion about the internet and mentioned the speed as well. In the objective tone, only the facts are expressed. Now, instead of beating around the bush, the writer must come to the point. This saves time and also localization issues. Time, because long-winded sentences very often need to be read twice or thrice, if not more. Spoken language in technical communication. This requires active listening skills. Yes, I mean active. Say what you mean and mean what you say. Focus on the salient points first. Communicate what is necessary. A good writer needs to be a good listener as well. You can only document what you understand after all. Sarcasm and humor have no place in technical writing. Words uttered are taken seriously and documented. Because for one, the listener may not really understand. Besides, the person you are talking to may not always get the joke or even appreciate it. The first few points always catch the listener's attention. So it is wiser to focus on the more important points first. If you speak a lot more than necessary, the important points may just get lost in all the extra information. Writing, what are the differences between spoken and written language? Writing is more permanent. Speech is usually transient. Written text can communicate across time and space. Speech is more interactive. In the age we are living in, speech is almost as permanent as writing when you consider the audiovisual tools. These differences are subjective in today's day and age. But having said that, unrecorded speech is transient and highly interactive. Written language tends to be more complex and intricate with longer sentences. On the other hand, spoken language tends to be repetitive with incomplete sentences, corrections, and interruptions. You can read a written text several times, but a speaker cannot be made to speak several times. Once or twice is fine, but a speaker can be less formal and use incomplete sentences, can correct himself or herself, and even be interrupted. Questions can be asked. Another difference is that writers receive no immediate feedback from their readers. Therefore, there is a need to explain things clearly and unambiguously. Speech is usually a dynamic interaction between two or more people. In a written text, you can seek out the required information. But in speech, the human element makes understanding easier. For example, the IVR, or the integrated voice response, is not as useful as a customer support executive. If you can't get through or understand either of these, you contact customer support. Or, better still, open a user's guide. The next difference is that the writers can make use of punctuations, headings, layout, colors, and other graphical effects in their written text. Speech can use timing, tone, volume, and timbre. What punctuation, layout, and colors do in written language, pauses, tone, volume, and timbre does in spoken language, often influenced by emotions. Written language is more formal. Some types of vocabulary are used only in speech. These include slang expressions and tags like, like, and a whole host of colloquial terms that we use. Colloquial terms are used by people across the globe. Only it kind of pertains to their ethnicity or nationality. Colloquial terms and gentle slang expressions, gentle slang expressions do bring about a little bonhomie among the team members. Vernacular influences are prevalent in spoken language. Differences between spoken and written language. Another criterion is the tense. In technical writing, the present tense is used. The future tense is generally avoided. Now an example here. When you press enter, a warning message will appear. Will shows prediction. We cannot predict what's going to happen, so we need to use the present tense. The present tense shows assurance. When you press enter, a warning message appears. Yes, the user is assured that a warning message is going to appear. In verbal communication, the future tense can be used as long as the information is clear and correct. In a conversation, you can use the future tense, but do not write exactly like the conversation. While writing, you need to change the tense. Person. Technical writers must write in the second person, that is you. In verbal communication, it is more important to communicate the correct facts. In verbal communication, we often use the third person. Okay, but when you address the user, you must address the second person, that is you. Use the active voice in technical writing to avoid ambiguity and convey the entire meaning. For example, the limits window is used to specify the minimum and maximum values. In the limits window, this is the active voice. In the limits window, specify the minimum and maximum value.
Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Jhansi Rani. Actually, we can't hear you. No sound is coming.
In the passive voice, up to 500 files can be stored. Active voice would be you can store up files in the database.
Raji?
So, differences again between spoken and written language. The voice, use the active voice in technical writing to avoid ambiguity and convey the entire meaning. You have the passive, I've gone through this, I'll go through it again. In passive voice, you say the limits window is used to specify the minimum and maximum values. Whereas if you convert it into active voice, you say in the limits window, specify the minimum and maximum values. Again, in the active voice, this is another sentence. In the passive voice, up to 500 files can be stored in the database. In active voice, you put it as you can store up to 500 files in the database. In verbal communication, voice does not matter at all. Passive voice is fine for error messages, which is again written communication, but that's the only place where passive voice is encouraged. In verbal communication at the same time, passive voice can be used frequently. Another difference is in contractions. Contractions cannot be used in technical writing. Words like didn't, mustn't, can't, don't, and so on cannot be used in technical writing. On the contrary, in spoken language, it is a done thing. For example, the database doesn't back up the information automatically. You cannot use doesn't. The database does not back up the information automatically. Contractions make you sound friendly and approachable in verbal communication. In spoken language, it is a done thing. It makes you sound informal and friendly. In fact, if you do not use contractions in spoken language, you may run the risk of sounding robotic. Imagine someone coming to you and say, well, I can't do this work right now. That's what he means to say, and I have problems which I can't mention to you. Like if the person starts telling you, I cannot do the work right now, I cannot mention my problems to you, it sounds robotic and a bit stiff upper lip. Okay, now contractions with friends and colleagues is perfectly fine. The next is jargon. In technical writing, jargon must be avoided. Examples like dig up. Instead of find, you say, okay, dig up that information. But in writing, you will have to say find that information. Or canned. Instead of pre-configured or predefined, well, it's easier to say canned, but you should restrict to saying canned and not writing it. In verbal communication, jargon can be used depending on audience familiarity. Jargon can be used in spoken language if you are speaking again to your friends or colleagues. Brevity. In technical writing, never use two words or more when one word will do. For example, in order to, just two is enough. In conjunction with, just with is enough. In verbal communication, you can use as many words as required to convey an idea. In spoken language, the objective is to make the person understand the concept. The number of words used does not matter. You can use a superfluous amount of words just to make sure that the person you're speaking to has understood what you are trying to tell him. Redundancy. In technical writing, combine overlapping sentences when possible. For example, you can perform task A using this feature. You can also perform task B using this feature. Instead of that, you can combine it to say you can perform task A and B using this feature. In verbal communication, explain as required for better understanding. Sometimes in verbal communication, you may recollect something and mention it later. So that could become 2 or more sentences. For better understanding, it is better to mention it rather than skipping it altogether. Pronouns. In writing, pronouns should be selectively used. As far as possible, avoid the its and the thises, because it is often difficult to identify the antecedent of these words. In verbal communication, pronouns are used and identified. In spoken language, there is scope for interaction where you can identify what the pronoun stands for. In written language, use pronouns selectively to avoid ambiguity. Now comes the accent. Accent or regional influences do not affect writing. In verbal communication, accent and regional influences have an impact. Sometimes due to the unfamiliar accent of the speaker, you may have to resort to the written material. This happens during interactions between people of different ethnicities or nationalities, or sometimes even within the same nation. Anthropomorphism. Do not attribute human characteristics to inanimate objects. Avoid using these words in technical writing. These words such as allows, lets, helps, enables. Attribute human characteristics to inanimate objects, that sounds creepy. Very often we use these words in spoken language, in product demonstration and such other occasions, which is fine. But technical writers should take care not to let these words creep into their documents. Trust me, they do, ever so often. While speaking, using these words do not matter as long as the correct information is conveyed. Now you have some taboo words. Some words such as these are taboo in technical writing. Please, kindly, thank you, above, below, stuck, hung. In spoken language or email correspondence and chats, you can use these words to convey correct information. In spoken language, you cannot afford to sound like a... You need to have your P's and Q's in place. But in technical writing, you can easily shed these and be more objective. Effective written language. Let's see what that is. It is precise and direct. It's chosen with greater deliberation and thought. It's more sophisticated and developed. It's less personal. It's grammatically correct. Using an active voice will help a lot to be precise and direct. Words should be well thought of and organized well. Written language should not be personal as it is meant for a wider audience. Grammar is of utmost importance. All writers are expected to have a sound knowledge of grammar. Effective written language is driven by logic, organization, and explicitness. It is objective and it is not easily retractable. Write exactly what you want the audience to know. Be objective and don't get carried away by unnecessary details. A written statement is not easily retractable. Effective spoken language is also a dynamic transfer of information. Is everyday spoken language including some cultural expressions? It's retractable. It is subjective. It's spontaneous and it's interactive. Spoken language is delivered in a simple manner. It could include some expressions particular to the speaker's cultural environment. Spoken words can be retracted. They can be subjective to arouse interest in the audience. It is spontaneous, as often it is not deliberate or well thought of. Spoken language is highly interactive. Combining spoken and written language. Writers are expected to have good communication skills, both oral and written, enough to discuss subject matter with team members across the globe, extract the required information from the SMEs, and document the extracted information in a usable manner. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Raji.
Thank you, Raji. Yeah. Thank you, Raji, for an educative session, and which was also well presented. Thank you for taking the time off to have done it for us at STC India. On behalf of STC India, I thank Raji Joshi, and I once again thank Adobe for helping us arrange this session through Adobe Connect software.